Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. If you have trouble, let me know and I'll just raise the volume a little bit. So I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm always happy to come back here. As Shannon said, I grew up in Kingsport. These are my stomping grounds here. I always feel at home when I come back here. So I'm happy for the opportunity both to be here and to think about prosperity in the Mountain Empire, because it's always a challenge because of the history of the region. And so I want to start by saying that I'm not an expert on economic development. I'm sure you've heard from them. I want to talk a little more abstractly about this issue of prosperity and development. First of all, because, well, it's all I'm really qualified to do. And second, because sometimes we need to stop and not think about the details so much and ask ourselves about direction and sort of overarching views of how we can get from one place to another. So I'm not here to give anybody a roadmap. I'm not able to do that. A roadmap on how to bring prosperity to the Mountain Empire. But I do want to offer my thoughts about ways that might be useful in thinking about it. So let's just move right along. So you didn't hear it here first, of course. You've heard it many times. But the first thing I want to say is that prosperity is not about money. Prosperity is much bigger than money. And the reason I want to mention this first is that I think it's a mistake to start thinking about economic development by thinking about flows of money to an economy. Because it's very easy to think of situations where economies have lots of money flowing through them and people are not happy. And if you look at polls of the United States for the last several years, over about levels of life satisfaction and happiness, at least until the last few years, and I don't know how this may have changed in the last couple of years, the happiest people in the United States were in North Dakota. And I'm telling you, North Dakota is not noted for the amount of money flowing through its economy relative to Los Angeles or New York or Washington, D.C. And I hear more about people's happiness than I do about their income. And so I wanted to start here. It's not that money isn't important, it's just that money can't buy you love. So we want to keep that in mind as we think about prosperity. So I just want to talk about a couple of you know these things, but I need to go through them partly to remind myself. So I want to talk about income growth in southwestern Virginia. Here's a picture from 1969 through, this actually goes through 2011. You can see the recent cataclysm here. Notice how your region did not, this is southwestern Virginia here, the blue line. Notice how per capita personal income did not decline here during that period. This is an interesting little fact, and I'm going to show you one reason for that in just a minute. A lot of this was decline in the housing industry in other parts of the country. You didn't have a huge housing bubble here. So you didn't suffer the huge consequences of the burst of the housing bubble. But there's another reason. This is a picture of transfer payments as a percentage of total income. So just to disabuse you of any notion that money, and that is the increase here, is a measure of well-being, this is transfer payments into the region, from outside the region, from federal and state government. I'm going to break that down in just a minute and show you. So, you can see here that there's considerable amount of growth here in transfer payments of Virginia or in the United States as a whole? And let's see why that is. Here's a breakdown of transfer receipts, transfer payments from government to individuals. And most of that is coming from outside the region here. The bottom blue section is retirement and disability insurance. So part of that's the aging of the population, part of it is disability payments. This is medical benefits, the red. And then we have income maintenance benefits, and then sort of a catch-all category of other benefits. So the lesson here is that a considerable amount of per capita growth in personal income in this region has come from transfer payments due to either an aging population or personal distress. So, to understand whether we're better off, you can't just look at changes in income. You have to look at where those changes, you have to look underneath and ask where those changes in income come from. So I don't want to dwell on this. This doesn't mean the region has gotten worse off, but it just means we have to be careful about how we throw around money measures as measures of success or not. So one theme I want to stick with for the entire talk today is that the economy is dynamic in the sense that people, jobs, capital move around, and they move around a lot. And that works against you, it works for you. But you have to understand, and you have to understand, we have to keep in mind when we're thinking about prosperity and economic development that we can't stop that from happening, and we wouldn't want to stop that from happening. You don't want to forbid your own children from finding good opportunities elsewhere, even though you might like them to settle near you, so you can be around your grandchildren. I feel the same way. But we have to keep in mind that this is always going to be true, and it affects everything we try to accomplish. Okay. Now, just a couple more pictures. I'm not going to dwell on statistics here, but there are a lot of interesting stories about this region, and of course, these are stories you're very familiar with. The huge uptick in unemployment in this region relative to other regions that has to do with a secular decline in two major industries in the region, manufacturing and coal. And the good part of this story is that the unemployment problem seems to have worked itself out. I'll show you another picture of how that might be true in a second, but I just want to show you how this breaks down. So the blue line here is coal, employment in the mining and extraction industries here. You see it has this sort of, kind of a lazy L shape there. And the green line here is manufacturing. And that just tells a huge story about the region that you all know firsthand. I don't have to tell you about that. The growth center here, that's healthcare. That's really a consequence of the aging population more than anything else. Let's see, what else is worth saying about this? Here is public administration. Here's construction here, the red line here. That's been just chugging right along, but of course a much lower level than something like the coal industry. And of course here's the retail trade industry, relatively flat, which is interesting because since the population's been going down, that means a higher percentage of the overall population. All right. And finally, this is one way that unemployment works itself out. This is population growth in the region compared to the United States in red, Virginia as a whole. And one thing you have to realize about the noisiness of these series, the noise is always going to get greater as you go from higher geographies, larger geographies down to smaller geographies. However, Some of that is statistical noise, but it just is going to naturally be true that there's a certain amount of averaging out over a country that doesn't happen over counties. There was a substantial amount of in-migration that collapsed. This is during the 80s here. Right here, there was a little bit of reprieve, and then more negative population growth, and then things have sort of settled down a little bit until a recent recession. As the recent recession has played out. All right, so one of the reasons I want to show you the slide is because it's important. Sometimes I find it hard to discuss, especially with people in political positions, how population coming into a region is not the only thing that ever happens. One has to accommodate the idea that there might be population leaving as well from time to time. If people can come in for jobs, they can also leave for jobs. And it's not necessarily a disastrous thing, but it's a fact of life in the world that as your profile of industries and your profile of economic activities change, so will movements of population change. People do move, and they move in response to economic incentives, as you well know. All right, so now I want to mention the things that really confuse me about economic development. When I think about the issue of economic development, you start off with a very simple story about attracting new industry into an area. And then the more you think about it, the more complicated it gets. And I just wanted to present to you a couple of things that cause me the most confusion when I think about these. First of all, higher productivity labor implies higher potential wages in your region. And that's good for the individual with the higher productivity, but it also implies more opportunities elsewhere. When you educate your children to a higher degree, a higher level, you are increasing the range of their opportunities, both locally and geographically. And for them, that's a great thing. But you have to understand that when you do that, you are also providing some opportunity for them to find the best employment of their skills elsewhere. And so the other side of that coin is that if you want someone to think about coming to your region with higher wage jobs, you have to be ready to provide them with higher productivity employees. Higher wages and higher productivity go together hand in hand. There's no way to avoid that. It's part of economic life. And so this is a true chicken and egg problem in economic development. And again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I have to clue you into the things that confuse me the most when I'm thinking about economic development. So you need to have a high level of productivity, which means a high level of education and health as well. But to do that, you're providing, at the same time you're providing more incentive for higher wage employers to come into the region, or for local employers to improve the productivity of their own labor force, which raises their wages. You are also introducing opportunities for the best and brightest to possibly go elsewhere. And you can't avoid that problem. It's an open world, people can move, and so we have to think about whatever we do in the context of conundrum number one. Conundrum number two is that higher wage jobs, as we already discussed, go with higher productivity, and higher productivity means fewer workers for each job. Just think about the coal industry and how many fewer workers it takes to produce a ton of coal than it did 20 years ago. So You need to have higher productive workers to attract high productivity, high wage industries, but higher productivity industries require fewer workers. Another conundrum of economic development that we have to think about. Also, and this is one that I think people so frequently forget, and that is increased economic activity in a region implies higher costs. When you think about what it takes to rent an apartment in Wise versus what it takes to rent an apartment in Alexandria, you see that the apparent differences in wages between a retail assistant in Alexandria and a retail assistant in Wise suddenly becomes much smaller. In fact, it pretty much goes away because they have the same level of productivity. So that's a kind of broad generalization there, because you might have someone with the same level of skills, but in a situation where there's a lot more traffic, so in a sense they would have more productivity because of where they are. Let's think about it. If we locate a new something in the region that takes 100 new employees, and it's not during a recession. During a recession, of course, those employees might come off the unemployment rolls, but during an expansion, we have to ask, where do the 100 new people come from? And they don't come from the unemployment rolls during an expansion. Maybe a few of them might, but generally speaking, you can't drive unemployment too far below 4 or 5%. So if you're in an expansion and you bring in 100 more jobs, where do those people come from? Well, the first thing that happens is people shift from one job to another, so you have this movement, this musical chairs of people around jobs. That's fine, but as that works its way out, then there's this marginal increase in wages, which draws more people into the region to take those jobs. What's the first person somebody needs when they move into the region? They need a place to live. What do? They go into the local apartment market. What happens as 100 new people or 60 new people enter the local apartment market? Rent rates go up. So that's good for the landlord, bad for the renters. So it's a different effect on different people. So ultimately, if rental rates go up in a region, now the people who are paying higher rents but don't get higher wages have to ask themselves, well, is this the best opportunity for me? Or should I go someplace else where I have either more wages or lower rents? So you see, what I'm trying to get you to think about here sort of intuitively is the equilibrium is very complicated. The movement from one equilibrium to the next is not so simple as saying, oh, we have a new firm that hired 100 new people, and hence all that extra economic activity is net benefit. You read economic impact studies all the time that do exactly this. All they do is measure the increased flow of money, but they don't take into account the fact that there are all these changes in prices and wages that cause equilibrium to move around a little bit, cause some people to move out, some people to move in, prices of things change. And so you have to take into account that when economic activity increases. Another thing to mention here, suppose I told you that a piece of property was going to make $1,000 more a year for the next 50 years than we thought yesterday. What's the immediate thing that's going to happen? Well, in a perfect market equilibrium with no real frictions, then the price of the asset should immediately rise by the present value of the future stream of earnings, the discounted future stream of earnings from that property. If the property is earning more income, you can charge more rent for it. Everybody knows that. So the reason I mention this is that when you have something that increases economic activity, a lot of the benefits of that increase are immediately crystallized in the value of assets in the local economy. And so, who gets the benefit? Today's owners of assets. What about tomorrow's owners of assets? Well, they have to pay the new higher price. And so notice that entire future stream of income becomes capitalized into your local assets. And so the people who own property now get the benefit or a lion's share of the benefit, and the people who buy it from them have to pay the value of the asset, including what we already know about the future stream of benefits for that property. So how is the next generation going to get the same increase in benefit as the earlier generation? You have to have another increase in the stream of income going to that property in the next generation. So notice how it's not that future stream of earnings doesn't benefit all future generations in the same way. It's an increase of wealth for the present generation, and then future generations will need to find another increase in the stream of income. And so it's one thing people don't often think about when they're thinking about the benefits of an expansion of the economy. A lot of the benefit is crystallized in today's asset values and has to be paid for by the next generation. Okay? Just in thinking about it, who gets the benefit? All right. And another thing I want to mention, and this is a real problem because of the way we make decisions about economic development activities, is entrepreneurship, which is one of the great creators of wealth and well-being in the world, increases with density. If you look at a map of the world and all you could see is the density of patenting, you could spot the world's cities. You could draw circles around the world's cities, even if they weren't marked geographically. Because, and this is inventive activity per capita. Right? Of course, if there's more population, there's more inventive activity, but it actually goes up by more than the population. It goes up per capita. You can spot the cities in terms of per capita inventive activity. What does that mean for us in thinking about economic development? It means that there is some advantage to clustering, to pulling together in a way that unfortunately has more benefits for one area than another, right? So our tendency in economic development policy is to try to spread everything evenly to everywhere. And that is a way of reducing the level of entrepreneurial activity. If you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, you have to think about trying to cluster activity because creative activity feeds upon itself. This is something we understand pretty well. And you can observe this all around the world. And so economic development efforts or prosperity efforts that are designed to spread everything evenly can reduce the amount of benefits you get from the policy. So those are my conundrums. Now let's see how I got myself out of this, now that I've given myself so much confusion. Now let's step back and ask ourselves, where do we get prosperity anyway? I'm not even going to bother defining it because I'm not sure really what prosperity is. I mean, we all know it when we see it, I guess. But I want to talk about what contributes to it without defining it completely, because we would all disagree a little bit. We agree on a lot of stuff and we disagree at the margin, but I don't want to. I want to emphasize, I want to assume we can agree on a bunch of what prosperity is, but I do know what contributes to it, I think. What contributes to it are three things: human capital, natural capital, and social capital. The three-legged stool of prosperity. Human capital, of course, health and education. It's people, how healthy they are, and how educated they are, how productive they are. And it doesn't mean college book learning necessarily, right? It means productivity at some valuable activity. I was just listening to a report the other day about this guy who has invented all kinds of cool new ways of getting oysters growing in the Chesapeake Bay, and has no formal training whatsoever in the biology of oysters. Just an incredible intuition in how to make oysters grow and how to make more productive what available area he has for growing oysters. This should be interpreted very generally. Education should be interpreted generally as productivity. And health, of course, is a contributor to productivity. We understand that. This region has very poor oral health outcomes. I was involved in a study recently at a new dental school right here. And our conclusion was the cheapest way to get better health outcomes here is to expand fluoridation. One of the greatest health innovations in the last 2 centuries. And there's a very low level of fluoridation in the water supply here. And just making sure more people had access to fluoridated water would do much more for oral health outcomes than the location of a dental school here, at a much lower price. Anyway, I don't want to belabor that point, but it's just something we did recently, so it's a fun story. In natural capital, we start with resources. This is an area that is blessed with resources. Coal has been a huge resource for the region for a long time. Timber, falling water, natural beauty. I guess I'll go into amenities now. Resources and amenities, of course, often go together, not necessarily, but often. So this area has natural resources that are also fabulous amenities. I love coming down here. I have hiked many of these mountains here and love to come back and do the same even still. This area has lots of natural capital, but in general, every area has certain amounts of natural capital, and learning how to make us advantage of that is one of the ways we can contribute to prosperity. Now, when we talk about social capital for a minute, it has 2 parts. First of all, I've already talked about entrepreneurship. We talk about this all the time. It is a magic juice that we don't understand very well. I can tell you that economists really do not have a great handle on entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship comes in a couple of different flavors. There's a kind of sort of daily entrepreneurship that gets people to open a new business and see an opportunity for expanded commercial activity. And so that's your sort of average taking best advantage of circumstance entrepreneurship. Very important for people's well-being and prosperity. And then there is the groundbreaking, capital-destroying, disruptive technology entrepreneurship. The people who redefine a technology, who redefine an area. And history is full of interesting personalities of people who are these path-breaking entrepreneurs who change the way we do things. And so entrepreneurship is this great spectrum from the daily small acts of entrepreneurship to these huge path-breaking entrepreneurship events. And it's funny that some of these great entrepreneurs end up impoverished because they're brilliant at the creative act, but not so brilliant at those daily entrepreneurship activities that make it a real paying business. Right? It's an interesting fact that this happens frequently. And the second part of social capital is effective and responsive government, because there are some things that we have to provide ourselves collectively that it's very difficult to think about providing through private markets. And we understand these things pretty well, although people disagree about the cutoff. You know, well, what do we really need government to do this, or do we not? There's agreement about a certain number of things. Public education, I think, is an area where economists on a wide swath of the political spectrum understand that there would be a general underinvestment in education if we didn't have some provision of public education. From birth, now we don't even think about public schools as the start anymore. We think about 0 to 3 as an important period of development. So from birth through college, there's some rationale for some involvement collectively to try to provide a common benefit for ourselves that could not be achieved by our individual actions. Second, We feel like transportation is another area where certain elements of transportation infrastructure would not happen if we couldn't do it collectively, although we push this reasoning way too far. This does not mean running a public road up every holler, right? That can be done by private, individual incentive. It's trunk roads, public roads that have a very clear public rationale. Public safety is another, the third. So these are all areas where it's hard to imagine how we would accomplish these things without some kind of collective action. And again, there's lots of disagreement over the boundary, but there's a lot of agreement about the core. And so let's focus on the core and not on the boundary. The lower cost you can provide these public services, the more attractive you are as a region. The more attractive you are, the more attractive the region is to you. The more effective your government is at providing, being responsive and providing these public goods, the better. And so these are, I consider these the key elements that give rise to prosperity for a region. Now I want to talk about coal for a minute because we can't not talk about coal. If I left coal out of my talk, it'd be like I was avoiding something. And I don't want to avoid a hard subject here. Coal is a hard subject. It's been a fabulous natural advantage for the region. But, you know, my sense is there's some ways in which it's been a curse also. Not because it burns dirty or anything. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about has it been a curse because it has made it so easy not to focus on the three stools, the three legs of the stool of prosperity.
Bill, you know to say amen, brother.
My feeling is that it's easy. If it's too easy to get by with what you've got, you don't make the hard choices to diversify and make sure that all the elements of the three-legged stool of prosperity are nurtured and looked at. And I worry that the natural advantage of coal, and I think, you know, when you think about countries or localities that have huge concentrations of a natural resource, economists there's this literature about the resource curse. Countries sometimes find they have a lot of corruption. Countries that don't have good, mature institutions, legal institutions, contracting institutions, public safety and governance institutions can find that having a lot of natural resource can be a curse in terms of growth rates. And I think localities with very substantial concentrations of particular natural resources need to be aware that, we know in other elements of our lives that putting all of our eggs in one basket is not a great idea usually, and yet it's hard because this is the easy path. This is the easy way to go. And so you have to force yourself to make this investment, even though right now it may not be the best one. So anyway, it just worries me a little bit. So let's look at the coal. I only have since 1990. The graph looks much worse, actually. I mean, the glory days of coal, and I'm gonna, I'm not an expert in coal, all right. But my view is the glory days of coal are over. I'm going to show you another picture of that in the next slide. I think there may be good days for coal and bad days for coal, but I don't think coal is coming back to be the foundation of the Central Appalachian economy. And that's just my opinion for what it's worth. Now, here's why I think that. The red line is, this is a graph of prices per kilowatt hour for two fuels. One is coal, the red line, and one is natural gas, the blue line. Now, it's not that natural gas is the only threat to coal. I want to point out something else. Look at that. There's not coal production been going down for a long time here. Well, look at the price. The price has been going down, and the production has been going down. Well, wait a minute. Supply and demand. Let's see if the price goes down. we should see an increase. No. We see, even though the price is falling, the production is falling. This is a very bad thing, because what it means is coal is losing, for whatever reason, it's losing competitive advantage over other fuels. The price of energy went way up here, and the production of coal just flattened out. Natural gas is a natural competitor for coal these days, and you notice this is just the kilowatt hour price at the wellhead. This doesn't even include transportation. This doesn't even include environmental regulation or whatever your favorite contribution is to the decline of coal. And there are a number of things contributing to it. So this picture just says a lot to me. And like I say, coal is not my specialty, but I think it would be a huge mistake to expect that the economy of Central Appalachia could have coal as its foundation for the future. That's just my opinion. And so I just put a little aside for coal. Had to mention it. And notice, I didn't mention anything about greenhouse gases or any of that. That's all kind of new. That concern is new. That's not responsible for this. That productivity in coal mines has been going way up over that period. And even then, it's been difficult for coal to be competitive with other fuels. Okay. So that was all kind of inflammatory, I understand. But, it's not my job to say nice things. Now I just want to, I'm about done, and then we can have you argue with my push about coal and other things. So if we're going to increase prosperity, we need to concentrate on people, on our place, its natural advantages, and our institutions. So this is where I think we need to put our focus if we want to succeed in enhancing prosperity in the region. But it has to be based on a realistic assessment of advantages, of which there are many here. I certainly see this region as having advantages and potentials, rather than simplistic comparisons to Alexandria or Arlington, right? Where, I mean, you're not living there, are you? Probably prefer it here. I don't blame you. I don't live there either. So sure. Okay, so these are, this sort of summarizes my thinking here. I'm not sure I've taken this very far. There's a sense in which a region is like a firm. I said that earlier. You provide something people want. You provide an attractive product. You do it cost effectively. You do it efficiently. You're productive in how you do it. You let people know that you've got this great product. And if you do these things, then you have good prospects. Not 100%, but good prospects. Right? And so, in this way, I mean, I think it's a mistake to think of a region as a firm, but I think there are some lessons we can learn from that. And so, I see one way to think about the region as thinking about what it can offer to the world, thinking about the most efficient way it can offer those things to the world, and then letting everybody know about that. I don't think it's a good idea to go out and buy people and pay people to buy your product. If you have to pay people to buy your product, you cannot make a profit. I so disagree with economic development policies that concentrate on going out and trying to find people you can pay to come and locate in your region. Because you are bidding against everybody else. And who wins in that bidding competition? The firm doing the locating, not the localities bidding against each other. If you have a place that is a great place to work and a great place to do business and a great place to be, look, this region has a history of having been a manufacturing center. You know it can happen here. But you can't do it with the same labor that you did the last round of manufacturing with. It has to be a new set of skills, a new set of young people developing the knowledge they'll need to produce and manufacture in the new economy. There's some sense that manufacturing is beginning to move back into the United States because we're being smarter about doing manufacturing, and we're not pretending it can be done in the same old way as before. So we have to think about making the region attractive and telling people how great it is. And then my view is that that is a successful strategy for improving prosperity. This is a land of natural advantage. It has challenges as well, of course, but the way forward is a realistic assessment of those advantages and focusing on the important contributions to prosperity. The three-legged stool of prosperity: human capital, natural capital, and institutional capital or social capital. And I think a plan for improving those elements of regional capital have the best chance of taking the greatest advantage of all the natural assets in the nation. Okay, that's all I had to say. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to offer whatever, engage in a conversation, I guess the best way to put it, about regional